I look at it this way. Um, if the first 10 days of the war, 10 guys kill bin Laden, where's the war on terror at?
Oh, this is interesting.
The checkbook would have never got opened.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's what I think.
So you're pretty cynical about our military-industrial complex.
I wouldn't say cynical.
Could you imagine if bin Laden is still alive? Just chilling in Cuba with Tupac!
Hey, yo, check it out, motherfucker. I'm Tupac.
And Castro? Wait, nah. Castro's dead. He just got old and died. It's not a conspiracy. I don't want to hear no stupid shit coming from you chronically online Reddit conspiracy theorists. Actually, he transferred his consciousness into another human body, and he's that now. This was a hard video for me to make. It's so easy to go off the rails and just talk about Jewish conspiracies, the dancing Jews on 9/11, $2.3 trillion going missing the day before 9/11, and then the day of, the financial sector of the Pentagon is hit by a plane that you can barely make out, and some say it looks like a missile from certain angles.
Before the attacks, Rumsfeld gave a press conference where he talked about trillions of dollars missing. The day, then a plane slams into the very part of the building where they were doing the accounting, blows up half the fucking building in the Pentagon, blows up a wall. Donald Rumsfeld was on, where was it, the White House lawn? Listen to this.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
Point being, it's almost impossible to talk about this moment in time without mentioning the wacky stuff because that's usually what's on everyone's mind. I mean, I don't know anyone who still thinks we want a war to stop terror. We went there to make money. Lots and lots of money. It should have ended at Tora Bora. The United States and its allies, which include the UK, Canada, Germany, and France, launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan to topple the Taliban regime who had been sheltering Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, who orchestrated the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York City on September 11th, 2001, which killed over 3,000 people. The Taliban was the ruling government in Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, but with America's withdrawal from the country 20 years later in 2021, the Taliban retook Afghanistan and instituted brutal extremist policies, like the repression of women's rights and the killing of many who were pro-American. The United States stayed in that country for 20 years and accomplished absolutely nothing. After 9/11, the CIA pretty much knew Osama bin Laden was behind the attacks, according to the official narrative. Bin Laden himself would even admit to the attacks later on. The man was even a CIA asset during the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. The rebel fighters who fought the communists in their country were known as the Mujahideen. One of these fighters was Osama bin Laden. The CIA would fund these fighters and even supply them with Chinese weapons as to lower suspicion that it was America who was funding the rebels, fighting their archenemy, the Soviets. After the Mujahideen defeated the Soviets and drove the communists out of the country, the relationship between the US and bin Laden soured. Bin Laden viewed America as a corrupting influence on the Arab world and would bomb US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. Thus, the CIA had a good track on the whereabouts and activities of bin Laden and the terrorist organization known as Al-Qaeda, which makes the fact that they weren't prepared for 9/11 all the more suspicious in my opinion. The United States and NATO invaded Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001. The country was under the control of the Taliban, another terrorist organization that was sheltering and harboring Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden. I heard John McPhee, a Delta Force operator who fought at Tora Bora, say that the Bush administration gave the Taliban 24 hours to give up bin Laden, but at hour 20 they invaded, indicating that it was never about surrender. America just wanted blood, and I don't blame them. America was supported by the Northern Alliance, which made up the bulk of the fighting force. The Northern Alliance was made up of various defectors in the country that opposed the Taliban and were now supported by the United States and NATO. They quickly dismantled the Taliban in only a few weeks and took the capital Kabul on November 13th, 2001. Now all that was left was bin Laden. Intel suggested that bin Laden was in the mountains near the city of Jalalabad. On November 10th, he had been spotted in a convoy of 200 near the city, headed to the mountain stronghold called Tora Bora. American Special Forces and British Special Boat Services were sent into Tora Bora to smoke out the Taliban and bin Laden. CIA operative Gary Bernstein called in airstrikes on the main training camp in the Tora Bora mountain region on November 30th, 2001.
Oh shit. Oh, God. Holy fuck. God. Give me a bone.
An estimated 180,000 bombs were dropped on Tora Bora, with B-52 and AC-130 gunships carrying out most of the aerial bombing. The deadliest bomb in the American arsenal was the Blue 82, nicknamed the Daisy Cutter, which had an effective blast radius of 600 yards, was deployed from a C-130 aircraft. Later on, the Bush administration tried to deny the fact that bin Laden was at Tora Bora, but the simple fact that they used the most deadly bomb in the American arsenal gives credence to the belief that bin Laden was indeed there. On December 1st, Gary Bernstein requested the deployment of 800 US Army Rangers to block off the mountain pass and prevent bin Laden's escape. His request was denied by General Tommy Franks, and Bernstein later said that this decision facilitated bin Laden's escape. On December 3rd, Afghan rebels began their assault on the stronghold, fighting uphill as the Al-Qaeda fighters had the high ground. Regardless, the Afghan rebels fought very well and were supported by American, British, and German special forces. Unfortunately, the rebels' commander Hazrat Ali failed to effectively communicate the plan of attack to his fighters, so many were confused about when to attack and what positions to take. Also, Hazrat Ali and another Afghan rebel commander, Mohammed Zaman, fucking hated each other, and their subordinates would fire on each other at various occasions, prolonging the effort and giving bin Laden a greater window of opportunity to escape. They probably hated each other more than they hated bin Laden. On December 8th, 2001, the most elite fighting force in the US Army was deployed to Tora Bora, Delta Force, led by Tom Greer, codenamed Dalton Fury. Delta Force had been deployed in Afghanistan for a few weeks now, and they were so covert that they had grown long 6 to 7 inch beards to blend in with the populace. They didn't even use army vehicles, and instead just arrived on the scene in pickup trucks. Now, in their minds, they probably thought they looked like Arabs, but to me they just looked like a bunch of fucking rednecks. And the pickup trucks didn't help either. I'm just kidding, Delta Force. If you somehow stumble on this video, y'all are a bunch of badasses. Don't want to live me. Although, if I were to be taken out, I want to be fucking Delta Force. Could you imagine if I got killed by some fucking bitch-ass Toronto hood man? I'd be pissed. But motherfucking Delta Force? The US had to send their most elite top-of-the-line fighting force to take me out? I'm honored. But anyway, I digress. Dalton Fury and his team, which included members like John Shrek McPhee, who you might have seen on the Joe Rogan podcast or the Megyn Kelly show, arrived at Tora Bora. According to Shrek, they had killed hundreds of Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters, and according to reports, about 1,500 to 2,000 Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters were present at Tora Bora, which means Delta greatly shifted the balance of power towards the Northern Alliance against the Taliban. However, there was a major issue with the Afghan rebels. Tora Bora was happening during Ramadan, and many of the fighters would retire from the mountain to go pray and be with their families. They literally gave up ground which had to be retaken again, making the battle far more prolonged than it needed to be. Delta Force had picked up an enemy radio, which allowed them to listen in on communications from bin Laden himself. Apparently they had some CIA guy named Jalal who had been studying bin Laden's voice for years, and confirmed on the scene that it was him. On December 10th, Delta had heard that bin Laden was attempting to escape. The Afghan rebels had allegedly surrounded bin Laden, and Delta had attempted to meet up with the rebels, but several Delta operatives were stranded and had enemy forces closing in on their positions. Dalton Fury gave the order to rescue his men and save bin Laden for later. The rebels who allegedly had bin Laden surrounded retreated from the battlefield to break their fast. Dalton Fury later wrote in his book, Kill Bin Laden, he deeply regretted not capitalizing on the opportunity and felt he had let the nation down at that moment. On December 12th, Al-Qaeda forces surrendered their weapons to the Afghan rebels, since defeat was pretty much a guarantee for the Al-Qaeda fighters. A ceasefire was also agreed upon, without the approval of the NATO forces. Gary Bernstein was furious upon learning of the ceasefire. No ceasefire, no negotiations, we continue airstrikes. Dalton Fury said many of the American Special Forces ignored the ceasefire and continued to attack enemy positions. The next day the ceasefire was over, and bin Laden sent out a radio communication to all his fighters. He said, "The time is now. Arm your women and children against the infidel." December 14th saw many Afghan fighters retreating from the mountain to break their fast again. Thus, the United States Special Forces were forced to defend contested positions against numerically superior Al-Qaeda fighters. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wasn't Al-Qaeda losing? That's why they facilitated the ceasefire. How do they suddenly have superior numbers? Don't worry, we'll get to that soon. December 15th is when it's generally believed that bin Laden escaped Tora Bora into Pakistan. After the fierce bombing that followed the ceasefire, bin Laden again spoke on the radio, which of course Dalton Fury and his team were listening in on. But this time bin Laden wasn't talking all that shit about arming women and children, like he's in World War II Japan, and now it was at this moment bin Laden knew. He fucked up. He told his men, "Times are dire and bad. We do not get the support from the apostate nations who call themselves our Muslim brothers. Things might have been different." His last words to his fighters were, "I'm sorry for getting you involved in this battle. If you can no longer resist, you may surrender with my blessing." Hey, say what you will about the guy, he's still a mass-murdering piece of shit, but at least he can admit when he's wrong, and at least he allowed his men to surrender. Maybe the World War II Japan comparison was too harsh. Nah, fuck that. By December 17th, the last of the caves in the Tora Bora Mountains had been smoked out. The most brutal fighting had occurred in the final days of the battle, as the Al-Qaeda fighters that stayed behind were determined to hold off the special forces to give their leaders a chance to escape. The fighters looked weak and thin, and then told the special forces that bin Laden had escaped into Pakistan. So, the big question: how did bin Laden escape? There's many witnesses and theories of people who were on the scene. An American journalist named Peter Bergen believes bin Laden escaped on December 12th, during the negotiated ceasefire between Afghan rebels and Al-Qaeda. Bergen said bin Laden escaped towards Jalalabad to a house of an ally. The next day he rode on horseback to a remote forested area that didn't appear on American maps, called Kunar. John Shrek McPhee, who fought at Tora Bora under Dalton Fury, reports seeing Mi-17 helicopters used by Pakistani armed forces. The helicopters seem to be making a quick landing in Afghanistan and then immediately return to Pakistan. This observation led some Delta Force operatives to speculate that Pakistan might have been transporting bin Laden to safety. Now I want to backtrack a little bit to the lead general at the time of the initial invasion of Afghanistan, General Tommy Franks. He was the guy who denied CIA operative Gary Bernstein the 800 Army Rangers to block off the mountain to deny bin Laden's escape. Tommy Franks took his orders directly from Central Command, which means he took his orders from the Bush administration. The Bush administration believed that Pakistan would detain bin Laden if he tried to escape, but based on the observation of Delta, this was a gross miscalculation. One thing that Dalton Fury said in his book was that regardless of the tribal differences between many of the Arabs, some ally, some enemy, they all revered bin Laden, even if they were actively fighting against him. During the ceasefire on December 12th, Dalton Fury tried to continue the attack, but the Afghan rebels that they had been supporting drew their weapons on Dalton and his men. Now, Dalton Fury gave 3 reasons as to why he believed bin Laden escaped. Number 1, the US mistakenly thought Pakistan was effectively guarding the border. Number 2, NATO allies refused to allow the use of airdropped Gator mines, which might have kept bin Laden and his force inside the mountains. Finally, over-reliance on native Afghan military forces as the main force deployed against bin Laden and his fighters. After everything I just told you, it's obvious that Dalton Fury's assessment of the American government was accurate. During an interview with CBS in 2008, Dalton Fury told the interviewer he proposed with his team to attack from the rear of the mountain, cutting off escape into Pakistan, but this request was denied by the higher-ups. Furthermore, Fury said he saw a group who he and his team believed to be bin Laden and some of his men entering a cave. The team called in airstrikes on the cave, and they believed that this had killed bin Laden. 6 months later, US and Canadian forces returned to Tora Bora and checked several caves, finding many remains of Al-Qaeda fighters, but not of bin Laden himself. Fury and McPhee believed that bin Laden was injured during the bombing, but was hidden away, given medical care, and assisted out of the area into Pakistan by the same Afghan rebels the United States had been supporting. The Bush administration later denied bin Laden's presence at Tora Bora, and the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said the threat of Islamic extremism went beyond just one individual, despite the fact that he was constantly asking Lieutenant General Michael DeLong if they had gotten bin Laden yet during the battle. Vice President Dick Cheney, who initially said bin Laden was at Tora Bora, later refused to comment on the battle. General Tommy Franks himself told AP News in December 2001 that bin Laden was indeed at Tora Bora, but later Franks retracted his statement and said no one was 100% sure if bin Laden was at Tora Bora. They only knew a large Al-Qaeda and Taliban force was in the mountains at the time, and bin Laden was likely already in Pakistan during the battle. So, based on these observations, it seems obvious to me that the Bush administration deliberately allowed bin Laden to escape. But why did they do that? Well, to answer that, you have to follow the money. The CEO of Lockheed Martin, the company who makes a lot of the bomber planes and helicopters for the US Army, Robert J. Stevens, made almost $4.5 million in 2005, $1.2 million from his salary and a whopping $3.2 million from his bonus. In fact, all the major players of the company paid themselves big fat bonuses throughout 2003 to 2007, and their salaries and bonuses kept getting bigger and bigger. As the bodies piled on, the money piled on as well. In 2006, Robert J. Stevens' earnings were well over $18 million, and then in 2007, it more than doubled at $31 million. There's far more people who made money off of the war on terror, and Johnny Harris has a great video about it on his channel. So you should definitely check that out if you want a more in-depth analysis of who got rich from this war. And he was the one who put up the Proxy Reports in his description, which helped me make this video. So big shout out to him. Although he has almost 7 million subscribers, so I doubt he needs a plug from me. So all in all, the whole reason why America allowed bin Laden to escape was simple. When there's money to be made, money is going to be made. I think we already know by now, in a capitalist society, money is far more valuable than human lives. And the fact that guys like Robert Stevens went from making less than $1 million to over $31 million by the middle of the war speaks volumes about what all this was really about.